Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. In 1961, West Side Story burst into movie theaters, becoming one of the most iconic movie musicals ever made. With its brilliant score, memorable songs, dazzling choreography, its Shakespearean story, and its first time ever on screen depiction of Puerto Rican life in New York City, it won 10 Academy Awards and made Rita Moreno a star. Yet, besides Moreno, it had not a single other Latino cast member. Now, a remake of the movie, directed by Stephen Spielberg, is playing in movie theaters. Did we need a new version of West Side Story? How does it compare to the original? And how well does it respond to criticisms that the original version was, well, whitewashed? Dr. Virginia Sánchez Korrol, historian and Professor Emerita in the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies at Brooklyn College, served as a consultant to the makers of the new film. Dr. María Pérez y Gonzáles, the current deputy chairperson of the department, collaborated with Sánchez Korrol to create a lecture series focusing on the movie and on the history of Puerto Ricans in New York City. Welcome. So, what was your reaction when you learned that a remake of the movie was in the works?
Well, I was very surprised. I had not thought about a remake of the movie. I was interested, very interested to see what they were going to do with it and whether they were going to right some of the wrongs that that the first movie obviously had. Would there be a cast of Latino, Puerto Rican actors in the new version? Would the historical background be correct? Would the historical moment be correct? I was very interested, and I wondered whether they were doing any consulting. And I believe this was sometime around 2017 when the news first broke that there would be, or that they were thinking of making a remake. And it sort of stayed in the back of my mind. And I looked every now and then to find out if there was any more news on it. And I didn't hear anything until 2019.
How about you, Maria?
Well, I first said, okay. Let's see how this goes. The first one had hardly any Puerto Ricans in it. So I said, wow, I'd like to really see Puerto Rican actors and actresses and singers, and music in it, that kind of thing. So that was my first reaction. I said, wow, maybe this is an opportunity, right, to have others shine, to break through, similar to the way that Rita Moreno got an opportunity, but for, on a larger scale, because this is long overdue.
Now, obviously, there were criticisms of the original, but my sense is that to many Puerto Ricans, watching that original version was kind of a seminal experience. Was it for the two of you?
It certainly was for me. It was my generation that they were depicting on screen. And that was the first time in my life. And I had been involved in theater and was a movie buff since the time I was 8 years old. So for me, this was the first time I ever saw us depicted in a film as important characters, as the main characters, actually. And I thought that was very, very exciting. And I also was an English teacher at that time, and I was teaching English Lit on the day that I saw the movie. And I had just finished teaching Romeo and Juliet. So that the original inspiration for West Side Story was very, very fresh in my mind, and I kind of saw it in both in a personal way, but also in an academic way. And I thought it was fabulous. And I think my generation kind of knew that there were problems. We overlooked them because there were so many problems depicting us in the movies anyway. A quick example, every movie that we went to see, wherever there was a character that was not a white American character, had an accent, and the accents were all the same. This became like a normal way of our receiving that information and perceiving the movie.
Mhm. So Virginia, you became a consultant to the makers of the movie. Did you contact them or did they contact you? How did that happen?
I did become a consultant, and it was an unexpected turning point in my life after an academic career of some 40 years or more. And they did contact me, and I found out that they were having a meeting in New York City and that they wanted me to attend this meeting. And so I did.
What did they want from you and what did you want to give to them?
Well, between the time that I saw the 1961 movie and the meeting with Stephen Spielberg and the creative team and the cast and crew in 2019, a lot had happened. First of all, we had been able to establish Puerto Rican and ethnic studies at the university level. We were producing literature. We understood now what our history in this country was all about. We had the resources for knowledge that we didn't have in 1961. And so I assumed that what they wanted from me was my academic expertise. But I wasn't quite sure, you see. And when I received the call to come to the meeting, I was very kind of a little bit, a little bit sassy. And I said, well, okay, who's calling this meeting? Who's going to be there? And they answered and they said, Mr. Spielberg, Mr. Kushner, Miss Moreno, and they went through the list and my reaction was, yeah, right. Okay, this is a think tank. This is a gathering of people for information. Well, they're on the right track if they're doing that because they should talk to academics who had studied this period and who knew something about the Puerto Rican community in New York City and who had amassed all of this information and important knowledge base.
Maria, I'll start with you and then go to Virginia. But we talked about what were some of we talked about the fact that there were almost no Latino actors in the original movie. But aside from that, what did you feel were some of the shortcomings of it?
The shortcomings were that, of course, it didn't really, I mean, the story was based on Romeo and Juliet, and it was really not a story created about Puerto Ricans. And that was obvious, right, from the way that it came across. So in that sense, right, many Puerto Ricans today have a love-hate or relationship with the 1961 movie. The reason being that, like Virginia, when I first saw it, I was about 13 years old. And I was very excited to even see that there was a story. I didn't know there had been a story about Puerto Ricans in New York City, which is where I was from. And so, and then with the song, the iconic song Maria, and my name is Maria, I was just blown away. I was really like, wow, I could finally see myself because I had seen very few others, right, in TV, in Sesame Street with Maria. And so there wasn't many other. There was the Desi Arnaz, right? I Love Lucy. There was a few, Chico and the Man. There was a few that I had seen. But when I saw that movie, it was amazing. And I loved musicals. And so that was really impressive for me. But so that was part of the shortcomings, right? There wasn't really Puerto Rican music in it per se. The actors were in Puerto Rican. The leads that were supposed to be Puerto Rican were not. And so that was really disappointing. Even the way they spoke, there was no Spanish in it that I remember anyway. And we all tended to have the same skin color, which I knew, for a fact that absolutely that wasn't the case. So it had a lot of shortcomings.
And Virginia, in fact, you said that the Puerto Rican characters in the movie all looked orange. Was that because these were white people that they put this orange makeup on?
They had, yes. I remember that they all had this, including Rita, who was made to look like someone from an exotic person, someone who didn't belong. That's the message, really, someone who didn't belong. And she has spoken about this beautifully, talking about how when they did put the makeup on her, she said, I am Puerto Rican. You don't have to make me look Puerto Rican. I
This is
am
how I
Puerto
look as
Rican.
Puerto Rican.
And I think the makeup artist said to her, "What are you, a racist?"
Were there specific, as consultant, were there specific suggestions that you made to them about what you'd like to see in the film?
Yeah.
And did they follow any of them?
Well, they actually did, because from that first meeting, I wasn't there to be part of a think tank. I was actually there because they wanted me to talk about my work to the cast and crew, which meant talking about what the New York Puerto Rican community was like during that early time, which is the subject of my first book. And so from that point on, I was called in one or two other times, and then I was offered the opportunity to become part of the film and become the historical consultant. And where my work and my suggestions were important were particularly in what the community was like, and you can see that in the film, because you see that the portrayal is of a working class Puerto Rican community that is beginning to be set up businesses. You see that it is an emerging community. You see entrepreneurship. You see people working. You see what they're doing. But the other point about it, and I talked to the cast and crew several times. You remember, one of the things about the 2021 movie is that the cast is very young, so they have absolutely no experience with what their grandparents went through as early migrants to New York City. And they had to learn that. And so from my experience, I could tell them how urban renewal ruined my neighborhood in the Bronx, how we were forced to move to Brooklyn, what it meant for a young girl to have to uproot at a critical time in life when you're a teenager and you have friends and you have family, and suddenly you're told you have to move. What was it like to live in an area that you knew wasn't your area anymore, that you were being forced to move? You are not coming back because you would not be able to afford the new housing or the apartments that would arise in the place of the old tenements. And so we moved to Brooklyn at that point, which turned out to be very fortunate for me personally. But the experience of urban renewal is a crushing one. And that gentrification plays a major role in the film.
And you did see hints of that in the movie. You saw, I mean, the beginning,
Yes.
all the buildings that had been torn down. And I think there was a shot of the new Lincoln Center that was coming. And of course, all of the Puerto Rican characters in the film this time are played by, at least by Latinos. The casting of more brown-skinned characters, including the actress who played Anita. And I think, and one touch was, at one point they sing the Puerto Rican national anthem, in which was,
Yes.
and they speak in Spanish. There are
Yes.
times where they speak in
Major.
Spanish.
And we do have to point out that it's not just the national, it's the revolutionary
Okay.
version
Yes.
of La
Yeah.
Borinqueña that independentists sing.
When Tony Kushner asked me to look at his script for the first time, and I actually came on board to work with him. When I came to the part of the La Borinqueña, I was stunned. I said, "Wow, this is really, really great, but does it fit? How does it fit into this time period?" And so I was able to go back into the history. What was happening in our community during the 1950s? Well, there's a great migration from Puerto Rico coming to New York City. And they're coming to neighborhoods like that because there is already a Puerto Rican community living in the United States. And it's been here for dozens, since the turn of the century. So we were able to pick up where would young people learn about La Borinqueña. Where would they learn that the revolutionary flag is a light blue flag? How does this fit in? And it fits in perfectly, because historically, when you look at what was happening, it makes all the sense in the world that a group of young men trying to defend their community from urban renewal and from gang members of other ethnic groups would know about that. They would begin to learn about that because they would be looking for revolutionary. They know about it because it's in the newspapers.
Maria, tell me about the class that the two of you decide to put together at Brooklyn College around the movie.
Well, yes, the class is PRLS 2105, New York Latinx Culture and the Arts. So it's a course that we already offer. When Virginia became a consultant, we began discussing ways that we can help leverage, right? Finally, she's been called into a movie directed by Stephen Spielberg, no less, right? An iconic movie. And that, how can we capitalize on that for our students? How can we showcase, right, the arts, what is going on with this movie, how to critique it, how to look at it, how to compare it to the 1961 version, and how do we get our students to sort of see through film, right, gentrification, the history of Puerto Ricans as U.S. citizen immigrants, right? That whole experience. How do we look at the music, Puerto Rican music, Latinx music? And so we decided that we would centerpiece, right, the lecture series around West Side Story with guest speakers that were involved in the new making of West Side Story. So our very first guest was Virginia herself, right? And then we had Maestro Bobby Sanabria with the music. And I thought perhaps they might use, he did West Side Story Reimagined, a whole album. And I thought that he added the Latin jazz, right, the Puerto Rican type of music into the West Side Story songs. And then we had Ernesto Acevedo Munoz, who wrote a book, right, about the American masterpiece, West Side Story. And we brought in Juan Gonzalez, who lived during that time, right? The news journalist. He was a Puerto Rican young lord activist during the 60s. So he came in and spoke about gangs and coalitions during that time. We had Victor Cruz come in. And it was so exciting because he is the creator. He did voice diction coaching for the actors with the Spanish accent. We had Janine Tesori, right? Great musician, the first female musical composer on Broadway to make history in the way that she has. Tony Kushner, right? The legendary writer in the United States, and he joined us. And so we, and then finally, right, we capped it off with Stephen Spielberg. And so it was great to have them give of their time and their energy and to speak to our students. It's CUNY, right? It's working class students, many immigrant students, first generation college students. And so they all got to hear, right, from these experts in the field, from distinguished guests and artists themselves about what they did, what their life story and connection to West Side Story is, and about access.
Can the viewers of this show see those lectures? Are they online?
Yes, they are online. If you type up Brooklyn College and West Side Story, you'll see the links. It automatically comes up and you'll see all of the series. We posted the sessions there. And so, yes, absolutely, they can be seen. And so it was a very successful lecture series in the sense that we made sure that it had practical parts to it, right? So we interviewed these distinguished guests, and we kept asking them, well, how did you get started? And what do you think about, opening up access, right? We wanted our students to hear, because a lot of the times what happens is our students are very talented, Puerto Ricans, Latinxes, all kinds of CUNY students, but they are very talented, but they don't know how to, who do you contact? Where do you go? How do you get an agent? How do you get a manager? You don't even have access. You don't even know where to begin. Right. And so the series was supposed to be a way, and we kept asking each of them. And so each of them gave answers about how they did it. What is it that they did? Who did they contact? And practical tips, advice as to how to get involved, how to get started, how to get going, right? Because it's not for lack of talent. It's for lack of access and not knowing. right? And so in Spanish, we say padrinos, like godfathers. You need sort of, right, someone who's going to help you along, a mentor. And so we asked our speakers about mentorships and access and how they were involved in trying to broaden the table, right? And trying to expand access. Because again, right, the talent is there. It's a matter of tapping into that great, enormous talent.
Right.
And oftentimes we don't get to do that because of class, because of race, because we just don't know who and what and where. And so the series was supposed to help our students, and I think it did. I've heard back from many of the students who attended, and even strangers who reached out and said, this was great, this was fantastic, we really needed to hear this, we learned a lot of practical tips.
Following up on that, I was reading that while Latinos make up 20% of the U.S. population, and they go to the movies more than any other group in the country. I didn't know that, but they held only 4.6% of the movie acting roles in 2019, had writing credits on just 2.8%, and directing credits on only 2.7%. And it is true that 60 years after the original West Side Story, one still doesn't see many movies that feature Latinos as major characters or as characters at all. I noticed that Stephen Spielberg in his lecture said, well, in order to have more movies about Latinos, there needs to be more writing about Latino life. Movies come from books, from screenplays, from plays. I sort of wondered though, and that's true, but I sort of wondered if that's just sort of passing the buck back to Latinos themselves, that if you only wrote more stories about yourselves, there'd be more movies about yourselves. Because I suspect that Latinos are writing a lot of stuff that just they don't know how to market, or nobody's picking it up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think if I could just jump in here, one of the points that we made with all of our guests is that we questioned how they themselves were they involved in initiatives to open the door, to make that table wider, to undertake mentorships, to have students shadow them, to be able to learn from the very, very beginning how things were done. And so many of the people that we talked to listed organizations that they have been working with. And that to us was an important source for our students, because it's not just a question of writing the story. Writing the story is the first step. Now you've got to pitch that story. You've got to sell it. The timing is perfect for an explosion of Latino films and Latino directors and producers and actors and storytellers, because of the demographics of our country right now and the positions that we're in, where people are aware that we need these stories in order to learn from one another how to live better together. This is an important time for that. And we have those resources now available to our students. And in some cases, some of the speakers offered themselves, maybe you've got an idea here. Maybe we could do something in the future to bring in writers, to bring in people who are interested in making movies. We're doing very, very well in terms of documentaries. West Side Story is not a documentary, it's a work of art. We need to do more in that area. And I think that the 2021 movie is and the work that we've done with the people who made that possible is an opening of a door. Okay. So we're ready to open doors in that direction as well.
I assume that your students were required to watch one or both of the movies. What did they think of it? What did they think of the new movie, the new version?
They definitely were required to watch the first movie. The second movie still hadn't come out. It came out just at the cusp of our very last class. However, there was a screening at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at CUNY, at the Lincoln Center Theater, actually, right, where the movie, the background of that takes place. So we sort of see the results of gentrification there, but we were invited, our class, and so some of them were able to attend. And so they thought that the first one definitely had many problems. And some of them actually hated that first movie. Some of them said they actually liked this one, and some of them even loved this one, while it still had some shortcomings, right? So 60 years later, we still don't have a Puerto Rican Maria and a Puerto Rican Bernaldo, right? The two leads that are Puerto Rican, they're still not Puerto Rican. They're Latinx, which is much better, right? We've made a lot of progress, but they missed the opportunity. And when is that going to happen again? Probably never again in terms of a remake, right? It's another 60 years maybe, but
well, you never know. You
never know.
how many times did they redo King Kong? It just kept coming and coming and coming. So you never know.
And there are
I,
different.
I was really skeptical when they said they're going to doing a remake, and but I have to say that the new version was much better than I thought, and I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty good.
It was much better. It still has, right, many issues there. And I think that having Puerto Rican and Latinx writers write their own stories, and again, there's not a lack of people doing that. It's just a lack of access. Those with
Right.
money, right? It takes money. It takes know-how. And I think that one of the things I really liked about Virginia being able to be part of that is that as a CUNY professor, she was able to give CUNY students, right, access to some of these greats and to hear what they had to say and to get some really good advice and perhaps maybe some collaborations out of this. And so that was what was really important, right? Being able to, because you need influence, you need money, you know, they're not just gonna say, oh, because you're great, you're gonna get in. And so, I mean, you have to sort of break through the old boys network, the old boys white network as well. And so we really do need to have our students and people who are writing, right, to have access. And so that's very critical. So I'm really glad you brought up those statistics that you did, because it is so true. And there's no one lived experience of being Puerto Rican in the United States. There's so, you know, we're a diverse community with diverse beliefs and diverse experiences. And so we just need many more stories like this to go forward, right? Stories that tell the everyday's ins and outs of what it means to be Puerto Rican in the United States.
Well, one of the points that I wanted to make was that Stephen Spielberg demanded that all the characters who were Latinos in the 2021 West Side Story would be of Latino origins. And he was adamant about that. And by doing that, he showcases the talent that there is in that community. And we're beginning to see that now with the awards and how the magnificent work that these kids did is being acknowledged.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to thank Dr. Virginia Sánchez Korrol, Professor Emerita in the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies at Brooklyn College, and Dr. María Pérez y Gonzáles, the current Deputy Chairperson of that department, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Twitter at 1-to-1 CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.